Hi everyone, it's Jun Oppa here. Today we are going to learn something very important in Korean. It's called honorific expressions. Korean culture places a strong emphasis on respect, especially based on age and status. And this is clearly reflected in the way people speak. In Korean, we often use honorific expressions to show respect. This is influenced by Confucian values, which are deeply rooted in Korean society. We use different speech styles depending on the age, relationship, and social status of the person we are talking to, or even talking about. Many of you might already be familiar with the concept of 존댓말 and 반말. If you're curious about that, please check out my previous video. However, did you know that there are actually two types of 존댓말? One is the polite form that commonly used in everyday situations to show respect, and the other is the formal style used in very official situations like job interviews or the military. Today, we are going to learn about that formal style, called 격식체 in Korean. First, let's talk about honoring the subject of the sentence. When the subject is someone older or someone with higher status like a teacher or your boss, we add 시 or 으시 to the verb stem. If the verb stem ends in a vowel, you add 시. If the verb stem ends in a consonant, you add 으시. Let's look at some examples. 선생님이 집에 갑니다. 선생님께서 집에 가십니다. Instead of 갑니다, we say 가십니다 because the verb stem 가다 ends in a vowel. So we add 시. 어머니가 예뻐요. 어머니께서 예쁘세요. 예뻐요 becomes 예쁘세요 because the adjective stem 예쁘다 ends in a vowel. So we add 시. 아버지는 책을 읽어요. 아버지께서 책을 읽으세요. We say 읽으세요 instead of 읽어요 because the verb stem 읽다 ends in a consonant. So we add 으시. 어머니는 신발을 신어요. 어머니께서 신발을 신으세요. 신으세요 is used instead of 신어요 because the verb stem 신다 ends in a consonant. So we add 으시. We also honor the listener when they are older or unfamiliar to us. There are different levels of politeness depending on the situation. Let's compare. 도와주셔서 감사합니다. Formal polite. 도와주셔서 감사해요. Informal polite. 도와줘서 고마워. 해줘. You have to use the appropriate ending based on your relationship with the person and their status. Some verbs have completely different honorific forms. For example, 자다, 주무시다. 말하다, 말씀하시다. 먹다, 잡수시다. 죽다, 돌아가시다. 있다, 계시다. So the words on the left and words on the right, they mean the same. So instead of 할아버지는 저녁을 먹고 있어요, you should say 할아버지께서 저녁을 드시고 계세요. And instead of 엄마는 집에 없어요, you should say 어머니께서 집에 안 계세요. Not only verbs but also nouns change. 나이, 연세. 이름, 성함. 집, 댁. 밥, 진지. 사람, 분. For example, 이름이 뭐예요? means what's your name? But you can also say 성함이 어떻게 되세요? when speaking politely in a formal setting like at work or with elders. As you can see, 이름 is changed to 성함. Here it's written 할아버지, 밥 드세요. But instead of 밥 드세요, you should say 진지 드세요. 밥 and 진지 mean the same thing, but 진지 is the honorific form. There are also special particles and titles used in honorific speech. Instead of 이가, you use 께서. Instead of 에게, 한테, you use 께. Instead of 은는, you use 께서. For example, instead of 엄마는 집에 없어요, you can say 어머니께서 집에 안 계세요. Here, 는 is replaced with 께서. Instead of 아빠한테 줘, you can say 아버지께 드려. Here, the particle 께 is used instead of 한테. Also, we add 님 to some titles and professions to show respect. I'm sure you've heard 님 a lot, so it shouldn't be too difficult. For example, 선생 becomes 선생님, 박사 becomes 박사님, 사장 becomes 사장님, 예수 becomes 예수님, 목사 becomes 목사님. So far, we've used honorific forms to elevate others, but we can also show respect by lowering ourselves. We do this by changing some nouns and verbs. For example, 나 becomes 저, 우리 becomes 저희, 말하다 becomes 말씀드리다, 묻다 becomes 엽줍다, 주다 becomes 드리다. Instead of 나도 그 소식을 들었어, say 저도 그 소식을 들었어요. 나 and Joe both mean I, but Joe lowers the speaker. Instead of 이제 말할게, you can say 이제 말씀드릴게요. This sounds more respectful, especially when speaking to your boss. Here's an important tip. We rarely use the word 당신 these days. It used to be a formal way to say you, but now it often sounds rude and confrontational. So you should avoid using it in practice. Instead, we usually just use the person's name or title. For example, 요코 씨, 재준 씨가 요코 씨를 찾았어요. Here's the second tip. There are two honorific forms of 주다. That means to give. 드리다. You use it when the speaker is lower than the receiver. And 주시다. You use it when the subject is higher than the listener. 저는 어머니께 선물을 드렸어요. We use 드리다 because the receiver, 어머니, has higher status. 어머니께서 저에게 선물을 주셨어요. We use 주시다 because the subject, 어머니, has higher status. That's all for today. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments. And now, let's check. 할아버지께서 집에 계세요. 할머니께서 진지를 드셨어요. 선생님께서 학교에 가십니다. 교수님께서 학생을 만났어요.